Did you know the legendary conqueror who made all of Europe shake actually penned a trashy romance novel? And after he passed away on St. Helena, his remains were totally disrespected when a doctor removed his most private part, which was then auctioned off for years as a creepy souvenir. Yes, this is the verified reality of a guy who once held the world in the palm of his hands. To understand his rise and epic fall, we need to dive deep into his deeply troubled mind. Toss out those boring high school history lectures because the story of Napoleon Bonaparte is really about bottomless insecurities and pure dark rage. It all kicked off during a dirt-poor childhood on the rocky island of Corsica. He was raised by an incredibly harsh mother who beat any sign of weakness out of him and completely wrecked the psyche of the little boy. He grew up defensive and aggressive before landing in a French military academy, which was a total social nightmare. Picture this proud but broke kid speaking French with a heavy Italian accent, suddenly trapped in a snake pit of wealthy elite trust fund kids. They bullied him relentlessly every single day, mocking his worn-out clothes, his lack of money, and his country roots. Down in those cold stone halls, while the rich kids tortured him, he developed a manic obsession to prove his absolute dominance over every single snob who looked down on him. By the way, let us completely destroy the dumbest myth about his height right now. Napoleon was never a short king. He stood at about 5 feet 6 inches, which was actually slightly taller than the average French guy at the time. That whole inferiority complex about being tiny is just brilliant British propaganda that worked so well people still believe it today. His real complexes were entirely social and not physical at all. He despised the elite because he came from the bottom, and that class rage drove him insane and pushed him toward wild ambitions. In his daily routine, he was an absolute menace with quirks that would make a normal person run for the hills. He would sit in a bathtub of boiling water for hours, demanding that servants keep adding scalding liquid until his skin literally burned. He had a crippling phobia of cats and would throw massive, uncontrollable tantrums if a feline wandered into his room. His sleep schedule was an absolute insult to biology, since he only grabbed 20-minute naps, jumping up in the dead of night to obsessively review maps and documents. He also thought eating was a total waste of precious time, so he inhaled giant chunks of meat while standing up, barely chewing, and finishing his entire dinner in maybe 10 minutes flat. But all of that bizarre behavior and control freak energy fades compared to his ultimate toxic addiction to Josephine. He loved this woman to a reckless degree, losing every shred of his dignity. He sent her hundreds of desperate letters from the front lines, begging for a drop of affection while she was very openly stepping out on him in the high society clubs of Paris. Josephine became his worst vice and his biggest weak spot, turning a cold, calculating general into an insecure wreck who was ready to abandon his entire army just to see who was spending the night with his wife. Imagine the scene when he realizes the entire city is mocking him, and he decides to channel all that rage into absolute battlefield chaos. He heads down to Italy with a crew of exhausted guys who did not even have proper boots, and just starts tearing the Austrian forces apart. He dealt with rule breakers without a trial, and threw himself straight into the line of fire on the bridge at Lodi, making his tired soldiers view him as a literal god of war. But that was not enough, because his massive ego demanded Alexander the Great levels of clout, so he launches a completely absurd and pointless campaign in Egypt. Just think about this pure nonsense for a second, as he dragged a whole squad of academics and scientists into the deadly desert to dig up pharaoh tombs and boost his ego, while thousands of his own men dropped from the brutal sun and nasty stomach bugs. This brings up another incredibly dark fact that his hardcore fans hate talking about. When a devastating plague hit his ranks in the city of Jaffa, and these sick men became a burden to his grand plans, this so-called humanitarian did not set up hospitals to save his crew. According to the unsealed journals of his personal doctor, he coldly ordered his medical staff to give the sick soldiers massive, fatal doses of heavy painkillers so they would not slow down his march. It was the ruthless logic of a calculating mind who viewed living human beings simply as disposable tools for his own victories. He later bragged that he could easily burn through 100,000 lives a month, and he did not care about the numbers. And when the Egyptian adventure completely crashed and burned, this brilliant leader cowardly left his drained troops to perish in the hot sand, quietly hopped on a boat, and fled back to France to grab power while no one was looking. And he actually pulled it off because the public was so hyped up on propaganda, they loved the bold tyrant. He pulled a fast one and staged a military takeover, becoming the first consul before his ego completely short-circuited and he decided he needed to be a full-blown emperor. You have probably seen those epic paintings of the coronation, but behind the canvas, it was a pure act of manic narcissism meant to humiliate everyone in the room. He dragged the Pope all the way to Paris, forced him to stand there like a lowly servant, and then boldly snatched the solid gold crown right out of his shaking hands to put it on his own head. With that one move, he practically screamed to the universe that he bowed to no higher power and no rules except his own desires. While the naive rural folks cheered for their new emperor, this newly minted ruler clamped down with brutal government censorship, creating a surveillance state so extreme that modern dictators would turn green with envy. His police minister built a massive web of tens of thousands of undercover informants who monitored every single breath in the country. They opened and read all private mail, listened to every whisper at fancy dinner parties, and locked people away in damp cells for giving a plaster statue of Bonaparte the wrong look. Also, this great liberator of Europe, who claimed to spread the bright ideals of the revolution, turned around and officially brought back forced labor in the overseas territories, coldly sending countless innocent people to work on sugar plantations just because it made financial sense for a failing economy. He was an absolute master of spin and public relations, who knew exactly how to sell a fake image. He built the first real, relentless government propaganda machine from scratch, pumping out strictly controlled newspapers day and night to paint him as a merciful and unbeatable titan, while his wounded troops decayed in muddy swamps and froze to death on mountain passes. His generals both despised and feared him, because he would publicly trash the reputation of any famous hero who dared to disagree with his genius plans. Acting like the ultimate toxic boss, he constantly pitted his top commanders against each other, loved hearing dirty rumors, and genuinely smiled when his team tore each other apart like venomous spiders trapped in a jar. The whole massive continent of Europe was just a giant chessboard to him, where he moved millions of troops to feed a sick ego that never quite healed from the beatings of his mother and the cruel jokes of those Parisian rich kids. He was basically taking revenge on the entire planet for his teenage insecurities, flooding the map with chaos, and building his flashy empire on the misery of others. But the most pathetic joke of all happened when he decided to play the genetics game to start a royal dynasty. Once he figured out that an aging Josephine could not give him an heir, he tossed the supposed love of his life to the curb and calculatedly bought himself a young Austrian princess named Marie-Louise, a girl from the exact same ancient royal bloodline he used to hate with a burning passion. It was peak hypocrisy, since he spent his life looking down on kings, only to desperately want to become one, blending his ordinary roots with high society to prove to the snobs that he was finally their boss. To lock in his new elite status, he started passing out the crowns of conquered nations to his greedy, untalented brothers and sisters, turning the map of Europe into a giant cash machine for his shady family, who just drained his funds and stabbed him in the back the second things got rough.